Now on BBC One, the 9 o'clock news with Martin Lewis.
The Prime Minister backs David Mellor through thick and thin after tabloid newspaper allegations about his affair with an actress. The Heritage Secretary says it's business as usual and asks for privacy to sort out his marriage. The government cuts the rate for national savings bonds to stop mortgage rates going up. And new fighting in Sarajevo means the UN can't restart the relief flights. Good evening. The Prime Minister has made it plain that newspaper allegations about David Mellors' private life will not affect his job as Heritage Secretary, and that the Cabinet Minister's reported liaison with an actress is a private matter quite separate from his public duties. As a result, Mr. Mellor is to stay in charge of any legislation to protect privacy and curb press intrusion. The Prime Minister rejected calls from some MPs that this should be handed over to another department to avoid any conflict of interest. This report from our political editor, John Cole.
Any minister who's locked horns with the tabloid press and then runs into personal trouble knows that his political career may be on the line. But strenuous efforts are being made to save David Mellor.
I've said all the comments we're going to make. Obviously, it's a very difficult time for my family, and I hope that we've made our statement. And as far as I'm concerned, my concern now is that we should be able to sort things out privately. I'm particularly concerned about my two young children, and I hope that now that people know that it's business as usual here, we can all get on with our work. Thank you.
The Prime Minister made clear he'd stand by a minister who's also a personal friend. He'd already rejected an offer of resignation and had phoned Mrs. Mellor to offer sympathy.
Mr. Mellor is at his desk, he's working, he's carrying on with his responsibilities, and that's what he's going to continue to do.
For him, it was business as usual. Before a meeting with the Mexican president, he found time for an unscheduled appearance at an end-of-term party in David Mellor's new Heritage Department. Downing Street was not even prepared to acknowledge any embarrassment over conflict of interest if this minister handles the press intrusion issue. That was privately worrying some senior Tories who thought Mr. Mellor should stay, but someone else should take on the press. But a new backbencher was supportive.
We're now in the business of damage limitation, but I don't think the damage is great. David Mellor has admitted what he's been involved with. I think people respect the fact that he's been honest now. He has the support of the Prime Minister and the Parliamentary Party, and I think he will survive.
Brian Davis, former Secretary of the Parliamentary Labour Party, would like the press intrusion issue left to a private member's bill and for David Mellor to concentrate on the national lottery and the future of the BBC.
Let's first of all put out of mind the idea this is a resigning issue for a minister, and secondly that this is the only issue which confronts a department which covers a very wide range of important matters.
Sir David Steele thought the Prime Minister must think again.
I think this is not a resignation issue. This is a private matter which Mr. Mellor should be left to sort out for himself. On the other hand, I do think the Prime Minister is wrong to suggest that he should continue to be in charge of privacy legislation or the privacy inquiry. Clearly, it's going to be embarrassing for him and for everybody, and it would be more sensible to put it back to the Home Office where it was before the election, or indeed into Mr. Waldegrave's Citizens' Charter Ministry.
At a Downing Street reception tonight, John Major met his new adversary, John Smith. They'll not see each other again until Parliament reassembles 3 months from now.
Congratulations, John.
That's one stroke of luck for David Mellor. He won't have to fight his battle for survival to a background of Westminster gossip. In such cases in the past, even when Prime Ministers have been supportive, the position of the minister concerned has often been eroded by events. In this case, Mr. Mellor's misfortune is that he's already in the eye of a storm concerning the newspapers themselves, and they have an interest in keeping the story alive.
The Press Complaints Commission, which oversees a code of practice for the newspaper industry, has called a special meeting on Wednesday to discuss the reporting of David Mellor's private life. The meeting comes as press regulation is being examined again by Sir David Calcott. 2 years ago, his committee recommended there should be new laws on privacy if things did not improve.
For the editor of The Guardian, who says he wouldn't have published this story if he'd been offered it, the important issue is not the story itself, but how it was obtained. Peter Preston is a new member of the Press Complaints Commission, which will hold a special meeting later this week to consider the Mellor case.
With this, we'll have to see whether either under the PCC or under any possible law, it's something that can be stopped, curbed. It's a question, I think, really for me, of how the people got the story, what they paid for it, the means, the electronic bugging. That's something that may be an issue for everybody.
I absolutely didn't do anything wrong by my rules. Mr. Preston must speak for himself. As I've said before, I didn't pay this lady any money. I've not ever met the woman. It's not a kiss and tell story. We did not bug any telephone. And as far as I'm aware, nothing illegal has happened.
Would you say the story was gathered through normal journalistic methods?
No, the story is an extraordinary story, but I'm not prepared to discuss how I got it.
The front page coverage of David Mellors' private life, which has brought the press to his doorstep, comes less than 2 weeks after he recalled Sir David Calcutt to look into just this kind of reporting. Sir David was first called in to chair an inquiry into the press after Mr. Mellor, then a Home Office minister, delivered this now famous warning in 1989.
I do believe the press is drinking, the popular press is drinking in Last Chance Saloon, actually.
Calcutt threatened a new law if self-regulation failed. The relevant section would, on the face of it, have prevented this story, proposing to make it illegal to record the voice of an individual who's on private property without his consent for publication. And by Calcutt's definition, the defence of reporting matters in the public interest would not have applied in the Mellor case. In June this year, the Press Complaints Commission said the press had passed the test set up 18 months before. Self-regulation had survived for now.
It would be very unfortunate indeed if self-regulation of the British press were to fail because of this single incident. It's much more important than that, and politicians, I believe, are the worst possible people to bring in laws to protect their own privacy.
The problem with framing any new law on the press is how to decide what is improper intrusion and how to stop it without preventing the press from conducting proper investigations. A delicate balance, now ironically being considered by a minister whose own private life is the subject of intense press scrutiny.
The government took action tonight to stop the threat of mortgage increases. It cut the interest rate on its first option national savings bonds by 0.5%. The Cheltenham and Gloucester Building Society said that should be enough to allow them to reverse the mortgage rate rise they imposed last week. Anthony Nelson, the Economic Secretary, said the bond would remain attractive and meet the government's needs with a lower interest rate. The move came after a gloomy day in the financial markets, with the 100 share index falling by 28 points.
The Treasury's move is designed to head off the threat of a new round of mortgage rate rises which would undermine an already depressed housing market. In the 2 weeks since it was launched, the National Savings Bond has taken in £150 million, much of it from building societies. It was this hemorrhage of funds that prompted the Cheltenham and Gloucester to raise its investment and mortgage rates last week. Other societies have been warning they may have to do the same. Building societies welcome tonight's move. The chief executive of the Leeds Building Society, Mike Blackburn, said, "I am certainly impressed with the government's speed of action and the clear indication to see mortgage rates continue to decline." But the interest rate picture is still clouded by the pound's weakness on the foreign exchanges. In the city today, shares slumped and the pound sagged alarmingly, at one stage touching its lowest point since Britain joined the ERM. The Prime Minister found himself, not for the first time recently, defending his strategy of pegging the pound to other European currencies.
We are in the exchange rate mechanism and we are staying in the exchange rate mechanism. And I believe that will bring a very considerable prize within our grasp. That is a stable macro economy, low inflation, permanently low inflation.
The fear is that brave talk won't be enough and interest rates may have to rise to protect the pound. Labour's new leader was quick to urge a different approach.
Well, what we need to have is coordinated interest rate reductions throughout the countries of the European community. Somebody needs to start arguing for growth, for full employment, for economic progress, instead of this drift which is happening at the moment.
Gloom is sweeping the world's financial centres. Stock markets fell sharply in Tokyo, Frankfurt and New York. Central banks around the world intervened to prop up the value of the dollar, which has been even weaker than the pound in recent weeks. It's an uncertain economic environment in which restoring consumer confidence is vital. Tonight's Treasury move is a recognition that a mortgage rate rise right now could kill any recovery stone dead.
Only a few hours into the ceasefire in the Bosnian capital Sarajevo, heavy shelling closed the city's airport, cutting off any immediate prospect of humanitarian relief flights. One airport hangar was damaged and the control tower came under fire. In the worst violence for more than 2 weeks, 10 people have been killed and 2 UN military observers have been injured by flying shrapnel.
On the UN's account, the ceasefire lasted an hour and 40 minutes before the first serious violation. Fighting continued through the night, and it has been a lost cause since. The fighting this morning raged mainly in communities around the airport, especially the embattled suburb of Dobrinja, which took its fiercest pounding in 2 weeks. The geography here is lethal. Broadly speaking, the Muslims are either side of the airport and the Serbs are either end of it. With so much flak flying between them, General Mackenzie had no alternative but to suspend the airlift for the time being. Mortar fire continued as he prepared to report to us. If not exactly tired of the job, he's running out of options.
It's getting a little tedious trying to cool things down because it's their responsibility, both sides, and considering the number of casualties that are being delivered across the airport and other ones we're aware of, I mean, there's not a lot of impact in me going around and say, hey, please stop.
The UN could not say who violated the ceasefire first and is having difficulty, especially at night, in determining what caliber artillery is being fired from which position. But the Ukrainian contingent has now brought in 2 sets of counter-battery equipment designed for precisely this purpose. It is nothing to do with UN retaliation.
Maybe you'd like to tell me what I fire back with. This is the peacekeeping force. I'm going to go over there and jab them with my ballpoint pen or something like that.
The carnage on the streets continues, 3 killed and 11 injured in mortar attacks. A defiant President Izetbegovic said he was pressing ahead with military preparations, including the buying of arms. He called for American intervention, not ground troops, which he had never considered, he said, but airstrikes. At present, the siege of Sarajevo is reimposed. No flights in, no convoys out, and for the UN troops, the main point of effort is simply staying alive. A UN reconnaissance patrol of 24 men was today held up at gunpoint by Bosnian forces who demanded that the UN troops hand over their weapons. They refused, and a tense situation was resolved only by the intervention of General Mackenzie. The UN's task is getting harder by the day. Martin Bell, BBC News, Sarajevo.
The European community has called for what's left of the former Yugoslavia to be excluded from international bodies. EC foreign ministers in Brussels decided the new alliance of Serbia and Montenegro cannot be accepted as the successor to the old Yugoslav Federation. They also agreed that an extra £80 million worth of aid should be made available immediately to help refugees displaced by the fighting.
With aid planes stacking up at Zagreb, European community ministers have been casting around for something else they can do and are calling for the establishment of land corridors as an alternative to the suspended airlift. Although Luxembourg suggested overland routes might need military protection, Germany said they were not yet at the stage of using military means. During the meeting, France questioned the effectiveness of Lord Carrington. After the counterproductive collapse of the ceasefire he'd mediated, the French Foreign Minister said the Carrington Conference needed reinforcement by adding on Russia, the United States and neighbouring countries affected by the refugee crisis. It was accepted that might happen, but Britain said the peace effort must continue.
We cannot allow disappointment to deter us, to lead us to say this is too difficult and we must give up. That is not open to us.
There's to be a speeding up of help for the refugees. Another trainload arrived in overstretched Croatia today, underlining the urgency. The community can rearrange its finances, redeploy its monitors, repeat its threats to Serbia. But institutionally, there's little else it can do. As the German Foreign Minister put it, it has few arrows left in its quiver. Brian Hanrahan, BBC News, Brussels.
The United Nations Security Council is due to meet shortly to discuss Iraq's continued refusal to cooperate with UN weapons inspectors in Baghdad. A White House spokesman said Iraq had to meet the terms of the Gulf War ceasefire and steps would be taken to make sure all its weapons of mass destruction were destroyed.
In Baghdad, yet another attempt to scare off the UN inspectors who've been camped for 2 weeks now outside the ministry that they believe is holding secrets about missiles. Iraq claims the UN team is packed with American agents and it's trying to deflect world attention to Washington. But so far, the UN is holding firm to its resolution that all of Iraq's most powerful weapons must be destroyed. Rolf Ekéus, the head of the special UN commission overseeing that plan, was in Baghdad yesterday, demanding that the UN be given access to the building. The Iraqis refused, instead offering to open it only to neutral or non-aligned observers. Mr. Ekéus emerged apparently unimpressed, no doubt seeing the offer as yet another challenge to the UN's authority.
Can we say you have made some progress?
Not an easy question, and Mr. Ekéus evaded it.
I don't say that it is absolute stalemate.
Further north, in Iraqi Kurdistan, the UN teams are under worse pressure, though Iraq denies it's responsible for a series of attacks on them. This morning at Sulaymaniyah, a car bomb destroyed an empty UN Land Rover, and the UN soldiers at the outpost told us tonight they were shocked at being targeted. Last week in Dahuk, a Fijian UN soldier was shot dead, and in Erbil earlier this month, 2 Austrian peacekeepers were wounded. But Iraq is giving in to some UN demands. The destruction of its nuclear installations, which began with this in April, was reported today as continuing satisfactorily, even as Saddam tests UN resolve in other areas. It's a challenge, the outcome of which may become known in New York later tonight.
The Italian government has sent troops and more police reinforcements to Palermo in Sicily after the latest attack by the mafia. The leading anti-mafia judge and 5 of his bodyguards were killed yesterday by a car bomb. Some police bodyguards have threatened not to work because they feel so vulnerable.
Italy's response to the killing of Judge Borsellino has been to send in about 300 troops to Palermo. Their task, to guard the maximum security prison where many mafiosi are held. About 55 of them, mostly mafia leaders, have been transferred to other jails throughout Italy. Magistrates believe they continue to rule their clans from behind bars, using relatives to relay orders. 5 of Judge Borsellino's police bodyguards were also killed by the car bomb. 1 was a woman. There's been widespread anger among their colleagues about the risks they take to protect magistrates and politicians. Some threatened to abandon the task, but their union said they were continuing to carry out their duties. The only bodyguard to survive was in an armoured car when the bomb exploded. He said all he saw were flames and he felt himself bouncing inside his vehicle. Italy's parliament has been told the country's stability is at stake from a new terrorist offensive. It had to respond firmly. It's the second killing in 2 months of a leading anti-mafia judge, a savage setback to Italy's efforts to combat organised crime. As one policeman put it, facing bombs like this, they were fighting an unequal war.
The Pope's doctors have said new tests carried out on the tumour he had removed last week show that some cells were beginning to become malignant, though the growth itself was not cancerous. Pope John Paul, who's 72, is recovering from the operation at a clinic in Rome. His doctors say the results support earlier tests which suggested the tumour was benign. No further surgery is expected, and the Pope is due to leave hospital at the end of the week. The appeal court has begun hearing the case of a woman serving life imprisonment for murdering her husband after she suffered 10 years of violence. Kiranjit Ahluwalia was convicted 3 years ago of killing her husband by pouring petrol over him and setting him on fire. Her supporters want the conviction reduced to manslaughter on the grounds of provocation.
Kiranjit Ahluwalia's case has attracted support from women's groups across the country. The court was told she suffered appalling beatings and abuse throughout her 10-year marriage, but stayed with her husband Deepak at their home in Crawley for the sake of their 2 children. In prison, she spoke of her ordeal.
My life was with my husband. It's just worse than hell. And he was treating me like a slave. In the end, there wasn't any choice. You don't want to leave me, you don't want to keep me, you don't want to look after my children. All the time he just wanted to beat me and scared my children.
Often close to tears, Kiranjit Ahluwalia listened from the dock as her barrister, Geoffrey Robertson, said the beatings had left her with scars and a deformed hand. He told how one night Deepak had burnt her face and hair with a hot iron, saying he was leaving her. Some hours later, Kiranjit finally snapped and set light to his bed as he slept. During her trial, Kiranjit Ahluwalia's defence of provocation was rejected because the judge ruled she had not retaliated immediately during a sudden loss of self-control. But Mr. Robertson said the jury should have been allowed to take into account her long history as a battered wife. Campaigners want the law changed to give greater protection from prosecution for women like Kiranjit Ahluwalia and Sarah Thornton, who is also serving life imprisonment for murdering her husband.
The law of provocation at the moment is unjust because it doesn't incorporate the experiences of battered women, and Kiranjit's trial failed on that.
The appeal before the Lord Chief Justice, Lord Taylor, continues tomorrow.
Tenants in Liverpool are being urged by the council to let a government-backed housing action trust take over the management of their homes. The government has promised to put £130 million into renovating 73 run-down tower blocks. It's the first time a Labour-led council has publicly backed such a scheme.
Many of Liverpool's 60s-built tower blocks are in terminal decay, the victims of neglect and vandalism. Half the flats in this block are empty, intruders making light work of the corrugated metal doors supposed to keep them out. Everything of value is ripped out, the copper hot water tanks the first to go, allowing open pipes to flood homes below. Most tenants here have had enough. They say they'll vote yes in the ballot.
We've got nothing as we stand now. We're living in a hovel, so whatever happens, it can only be for the benefit.
If I could get these flats done up and more security, more warmth, I'd be very happy.
When housing action trusts were first launched 4 years ago, they were a disaster, abandoned because of tenant opposition. The government made them more tenant-friendly, pegging rents and guaranteeing a return to the council at the end of the HAT period. Labour councils like Liverpool, who'd never have contemplated a HAT, are now openly urging tenants to vote yes.
Unless something is done, and done very quickly, then they have nothing at all to look forward to but a continued process of dilapidation.
The Liverpool left have raised the spectre of privatisation with tenants, but the government insists they'll have the choice of going back to the council.
It's unlikely that any private landlord would actually want to take over the blocks because they will be social housing. There will not be the opportunity for vast profiteering that the tenants fear.
Tenants have already voted for trusts in Hull and East London. A ballot's also planned for Birmingham. But in the end, the spread of HATs will be determined by how much money the government's prepared to spend.
Kevin Maxwell, the youngest son of the late Robert Maxwell, has been told by a judge to pay more than £400 million to the liquidators of a Maxwell pension fund company. A damages claim was lodged against Kevin Maxwell based on his alleged breach of duty as a director of the company. The court order means he's personally liable to pay the damages and could be made bankrupt if he fails to do so. Heavy thunderstorms have hit the southeast of England tonight, flooding roads and houses. Several homes in Worthing in Sussex have been set alight after lightning strikes, and a number of houses have been flooded on the Isle of Wight. Earlier, 16 vehicles were involved in a pile-up on the eastbound carriageway of the M25 near junction 24. 22 people were taken to hospital. Rover, Britain's largest car manufacturer, has modernised its Cowley works in Oxford with Japanese-style working practices. The president of the Board of Trade, Michael Heseltine, said the plant would enable Rover to take advantage of economic recovery when it came. But motor manufacturers say they need an exceptional month of K-registered car sales in August to make up for this year's slump.
Mr. Heseltine was given a spin in Rover's latest executive car, having arrived at the factory earlier in his private Jaguar. Ministers are pinning great hopes on the car industry, though it looks like being a dismal year. But the K registration will give sales a boost, and Mr. Heseltine remains buoyant.
The recovery comes, the investment that has gone into the UK automobile industry, both from the traditional manufacturers here and the Japanese who've come more recently, stands us in extremely good stead to grasp a growing part of that market.
Rover's spent £200 million in a bid to bring the old Cowley works up to the standard of the Japanese firms. Nissan's already here, and Honda and Toyota will be starting production in Britain later this year. Cowley must meet the Japanese head-on, but Rover's not there yet.
The European average level of productivity is around about 31 cars per man per year.
Rover is at round about 35. The Japanese are at about 45. What we're putting in place today and the processes that we introduce over the next 12 months and 18 months get us to that world-class level, which is the 45 level.
Rover management know that when Japanese firms started making cars in the United States, they forced many American plants to close. Rover's determined not to be the victim of the Japanese expansion here.
The Spanish government has called up thousands of extra troops to increase security for the forthcoming Olympic Games. It's concerned that the Basque terrorist group ETA, which wants independence from the rest of Spain, may try to disrupt the Games, which open on Sunday.
6,000 troops have been drafted into Barcelona, reinforcing 10,000 extra police. Every Olympic venue is constantly guarded, searched and checked. The Spanish authorities are taking no chances. Just 4 months ago, the Basque separatist group ETA set off 2 huge car bombs at a village just outside the city, killing a Spanish civil guard and a civilian passerby. But since the beginning of the year, a concerted operation to smash the terrorist group has brought some dramatic successes for the Spanish police. At the end of March, they seized 3 of ETA's top military and political leaders, including José Luis Álvarez Santa Cristina, said to be the organization's chief ideologist and planner.
The commando that existed in Barcelona has been dismantled, and at the moment the organization does not have the infrastructure to carry out a significant action. Nevertheless, I must stress that an attack could be carried out at any time.
ETA's political wing, Eri Batasuna, accuses the Spanish state of repression and torture of the Basque people. This is part of their video explaining their campaign for independence.
Nowadays, in this year, not 20 years ago with Franco, not 24 years ago. Nowadays, young people, is going from their home to fighting with ETA in a military sense.
But haphazard and ill-planned attacks have destroyed public sympathy for the cause, and the Spanish authorities are playing down the threat from ETA, whilst openly displaying the ability of the 15,000-strong Special Operations Group to tackle any attempt to disrupt the Olympic Games. Carol Walker, BBC News, Barcelona.
Tonight's main news again. The Prime Minister has made it clear that newspaper allegations about David Mellors' private life will not affect his job as Heritage Secretary. And the government took action tonight to stop the threat of mortgage increases by cutting the interest rate on national savings bonds. More on Newsnight at 10:30 on BBC Two, but that's the 9 o'clock news tonight. Good night.